decades, James Bond has been touted as the face of masculinity, the top dog alpha male spy. But is that really what he is? Today I'm going to be talking about Sean Connery's first appearance of the character in the film Dr. No, and then Pierce Brosnan's iteration of the character in his first appearance, GoldenEye. Before we get into the specifics of the films, we first have to understand what makes Bond Bond. There are a few characteristics that are seen throughout the different iterations of the character that turn him from a generic action hero into a recognizable super spy. After we go over these characteristics, I will then see how each Bond uses them. From that, I'll determine, is Bond a parody or a performance of masculinity? Everything from his character to the women he sleeps with to his martinis, shaken, not stirred, go into making Bond Bond. So, without further ado, let's get into. In order to answer this question, we need to know what these characteristics are. So that brings us to the first characteristic is the character himself. How is James Bond portrayed in each film? Is he the masculine alpha male paragon for the heterosexual red-blooded adults that Ian Fleming envisioned him as? Or is he an icon of failure? Is he how we picture James Bond to be, the suave, sexy super spy that never makes a mistake? Or is he really just an idiot with a gun stumbling his way through a battlefield, but just really good at hiding it? The next characteristic is the Bond girl. Bond girl is a title given to James Bond's love interests, or more accurately, the women he wants to sleep with. In each film, there are 3 Bond girls: the pre-Bond, the anti-Bond, and the pro-Bond. And the final characteristic is the villain. We'll be looking at a couple different villain archetypes and how they apply to the anti-Bond girl. With that out of the way, we can start discussing. In both films, Bond's affinity for women is established right off the bat with the title sequences. In Dr. No, the film begins with the bright, colorful silhouettes of women dancing across the screen. It's an odd way to start the film, but it fits with the era. In GoldenEye, the title sequence is much different. Rather than the upbeat tone that's set for Dr. No, it instead has scantily clad women dancing on statues and hammering sickles to GoldenEye by Tina Turner. This fits the film a lot better, as it is a new, more serious James Bond. It's no surprise that James Bond is a sexist womanizer. It's one of the things that everybody knows about him, even if you haven't seen one of his films. In each film, James Bond has 3 women, or what have been lovingly referred to as conquests, that he has to sleep with. Roald Dahl, the producer of You Only Live Twice, said, 3 girls, no more and no less. Girl number 1 is pre-Bond. She stays around roughly through the first reel of the picture, then she's bumped off by the enemy, preferably in Bond's arms. Girl number 2 is anti-Bond. She works for the enemy and stays throughout the middle third of the picture. She must capture Bond, and Bond must have to save himself by bowling her over with sheer sexual magnetism. The girl should also be bumped off, preferably in an original fashion. Girl number 3 is violently pro-Bond. She occupies the final third of the picture, and she must on no account be killed. In Dr. No, the first 2 Bond girls don't get a whole lot to do. Connery's pre-Bond girl in this film is Sylvia Trench. Shortly after the colorful women stop dancing, James is seen playing cards. Across from him sits Sylvia Trench. Bond has to leave, and Trench follows. What this film does is give Sylvia sexual agency. She's not bowled over by his charms. She didn't have to have him right there and then. He gives her a card with his number, then leaves. This is not a spur-of-the-moment thing, clouded by passion. She has time to think and make a decision. Because this is a Bond film, the answer is, of course, yes, and she shows up in his hotel room and they sleep together. She isn't seen or mentioned beyond that point in the movie. Brosnan's pre-Bond girl in GoldenEye is Caroline. Caroline is essentially a non-entity in the film. She's in it for maybe 3 minutes, They drive way too fast on a twisty mountain road, she gets a kiss from Bond, or possibly more, then isn't seen again. The only thing we learn about her is that she too works for MI6 and was supposed to evaluate Bond. The pre-Bond girl is just here to show that James Bond is a suave womanizer and use that fact to try and prove to the audience that he is a real man. The second Bond girl in Dr. No is Miss Taro, our anti-Bond girl for the film. Miss Taro isn't in the film a whole lot. After her introduction, she's only used in one scene. After Sylvia's surprising amount of sexual agency in the film, they turn around and do the opposite with Miss Taro. In this film, she's put in a position where she essentially has to sleep with Bond or risk possibly being killed by the villain. In this scene, Bond is insanely creepy. She suggests that she should put clothes on, and Bond grabs her by the towel around her neck, saying that it isn't necessary. He kisses her, and she pulls away. This is very clearly a situation she's not comfortable with, but because she works for the villain, we're supposed to overlook that. Bond then unzips her clothes without asking, and they sleep together. Afterwards, he sends her outside, and she's arrested. In the film, Bond was never supposed to get to her house, and he knows that. He takes advantage of a woman who he knows cannot say no. GoldenEye's anti-Bond girl Xena Onatopp is a lot more interesting and a lot more prevalent than Miss Taro was. Xena Onatopp is the embodiment of a few of the different subtypes of supervillain. Those subtypes being aliens, the evil god, the femme fatale, and the super henchman. Coogan writes, because the femme fatale role requires a certain element of sexual allure, she cannot be a physically repulsive monster, and she rarely is a mad scientist, as her mania would similarly render her unattractive. Onatopp starts firmly as a femme fatale, someone who Bond is attracted to and uses her sexuality to kill. She clearly takes sexual pleasure in killing, actually killing a man during sex, letting out pleasured screams in fight scenes, and tries to sex Bond to death. Surprisingly, the two never actually sleep together, but that's not for the lack of her trying. Her mania is revealed, and Bond loses interest. This is when she loses the title of femme fatale. The other subtype she occupies is the super henchman. She's superhumanly skilled and seems to be stronger than the average man. She routinely comes close to killing Bond, but he ends up getting the better of her in the end, and she slams into a tree and dies. Coogan writes, super henchmen are underlings who have enhancements, superpowers, or superior abilities, and so would seem to qualify as supervillains themselves, but as underlings, they lack the mania and drive of the supervillain. Onatopp could absolutely be a supervillain. It's not that she lacks the mania or drive, but rather she seems to just enjoy killing rather than being in charge. She serves 006 because he lets her kill. She's smart and cunning, but has no interest in leading. Her interests lie in mowing down a room full of programmers or stealing a helicopter, not putting plans together. Unlike Miss Taro, Onatopp has sexual agency. She uses her sexuality as a weapon. She sleeps with other people, not the other way around. She's always in control. She pursues Bond. She doesn't fall victim. She victimizes others. Connery's main love interest is Honey Ryder. They meet about halfway through the film on Dr. No's secret evil island, and he still decides to trust her. The first thing that she does is pull a knife on James Bond, but being the smart guy that he is, Bond realizes that he wants to sleep with her. From here on out, she doesn't do much apart from follow Bond around, give a bit of backstory for the illusion of a deep character, then get captured. Because she's the pro-Bond girl, they have sex in a boat, then live happily ever after. Until the next movie, when she's replaced. Much like Onatopp, Brosnan's pro-Bond girl is a lot more interesting. Unlike Honey Ryder, they give this pro-Bond girl, Natalia, something to do. She's not just along for the ride, but rather an active participant in the story. She's a skilled programmer on the GoldenEye project and uses those skills throughout the film to help Bond. She also outsmarts Onatopp and survives the shooting, escaping and finding her way to Bond. In the end, she outhacks Boris, brings the whole operation down, and gives us the illusion that her and Bond will stay together forever, even if we know it's not true. Now, what does all of this say about Bond? He's a womanizing, sexist misogynist. He doesn't value these women for anything beyond their looks. The purpose of all of these Bond girls is to try and prove to the audience that Bond is a real manly man. And what do real manly men do? Well, they sleep with a bunch of women, of course. Bond girls don't really need to be characters, although some of them are. They just need to be attractive and be attracted to Bond. The question of the day is Bond really this alpha male that he's made out to be? The inclusion of the Bond girls would certainly try to tell us that he is, but the other aspects of Bond don't really do him many favors. An alpha male is supposed to be smart, cunning, emotionally reserved, and always in charge, but these often aren't true for Bond. James Bond is supposed to be the best of the best. He's the spy to call on, but he's surprisingly bad at most of the things he tries to do. Dr. No is made up of a series of scenes of James Bond making terrible decisions, leading to him being caught and then escaping by what seems to be sheer luck. As soon as his mission begins, he almost immediately gets into an enemy car, which nearly ends with him getting captured. James Bond, being the great man that he is, allows the man who kidnapped him to have a cigarette, which contains a cyanide capsule. Bond then goes to meet Quarrel, a man who can take him to Crab Key, the location of Dr. No's base. Quarrel is immediately able to lure Bond into a trap with very little effort. The only reason he isn't killed is because the man behind the trap ends up being on Bond's side. Bond is comically unaware of his surroundings. He's always being followed by 3 guys pretending to be blind. He never once realizes that they always seem to be around, and that might be a little bit suspicious. Bond is then led straight into another trap. He makes plans with a suspicious woman to meet at his place. She then changes plans, wanting to meet at her place in the mountains. Bond doesn't question this at all and starts driving to her mountaintop house. Of course, it's a trap, and he's followed by the fake blind men in a hearse trying to kill him. In another stroke of luck, there's construction happening on the road, and Bond is able to fit his car under the crane while the 3 men swerve off the road and their car bursts into flames for no reason. Later in the film, he goes to Crab Key Island, the location of Dr. No's secret evil lair. This is a tropical island full of greenery, so Bond, being the smartest man in the world, decides to wear a bright blue shirt, and Quarrel wears bright red. Not a dark color like maybe the black suit he's always wearing, or maybe green to blend in with his surroundings. They wear bright blue and red. And what's the first thing they decide to do when they reach the island? They sleep. They don't bring shelter or anything to stop people from seeing and killing them in their sleep. They just sleep in the forest, right beside the beach. They're very much visible to anyone standing on the beach or on one of Dr. No's patrol boats. In a stroke of momentary genius, Bond is able to fashion a snorkel out of reeds and avoid being caught by the patrolling guards. This genius doesn't last long, however, as he doesn't realize the bright red danger sign next to the river. Bond then tries to take on a fire-breathing tank with nothing but 2 pistols. This leads to Quarrel's death, and Bond and Honey's immediate capture. As soon as Bond and Honey are brought to their holding area, Bond mentions how they should keep their voices down and talking to a minimum because the place could be bugged. Finally, something Bond says actually makes sense and is a smart assumption. He then decides to accept a drink from the villain, and it's drugged. Are you kidding me? Bond seemingly makes all the wrong decisions, but he ends up on top anyway. He bumbles around the battlefield like a complete idiot while things just work out for him. He's not some suave super spy. He's Jar Jar Binks with a British accent. Brosnan's Bond is a lot less incompetent. There are times where he acts before he thinks, but it's never to the degree of Connery's Bond. Brosnan's Bond will get captured or caught off guard, but it usually feels reasonable. In the scene where Bond finds out that 006 is still alive and is behind everything, he freezes and ends up getting captured. But it makes sense. He's been carrying around 006's death for 9 years, just to find out he's been alive and switch sides. That's a big thing to have to come to terms with. So when he doesn't know what to do, it doesn't feel like it's because he's stupid. The quintessential alpha male is supposed to be emotionally reserved and never waver in the face of danger. This isn't true for Bond, though, or at least not all of the time. At the beginning of Dr. No, Bond's boss M asks him to exchange his gun for a new, more reliable one. Bond is clearly upset by this, as his Beretta seems to hold sentimental value. This clearly doesn't carry over to Quarrel, though. When James gets Quarrel killed, there isn't so much as a tear shed, not a single line mentioning it. One of Bond's allies lays dead on fire 5 feet away, but Bond hardly seems to notice. Half the time, Bond seems to be in a panic. When you see his face as he drives up the mountain, he's looking around frantically, barely keeping it together. Earlier in the film, Dr. No tries to kill Bond with a poisonous spider. The whole time the spider's on Bond, he's looking at it with terror, sweat pouring down his face. The second the spider crawls its way off him, he leaps from the bed, grabbing the nearest thing he can to beat the spider to death. He's the world's greatest spy, but he draws the line at spiders. In GoldenEye, Bond is more consistent with his emotionality. He overall comes across more confident and quippy in a way that Connery's Bond isn't. There's a moment in the film where Bond does some brooding, and Natalia calls him out for being cold and unfeeling. Those are 2 key characteristics to being an alpha male. But what he does next very much isn't. He opens up to her. He tells her that it's a front, that he has to be this way in his line of work, because that's what keeps him alive. Miller says that James Bond has been in the vanguard of weak, commodified male beauty and compensation for its loss. A mythic imbrication of sex, secrets, and the risible but welcome slide from an empire to a commonwealth of nations. That is exactly why Connery was chosen. As the splendidly named Product Digest put it at the time, Connery was chosen after a thorough search for the exciting figure who was designed to set masculine pulses hammering and feminine hearts throbbing. He was a product of mass appeal, not some new face of masculinity, but rather a commodification of male beauty to get women to watch the film. Scholar Helene Shugart says, most agree that the 1980s especially witnessed the start of a dramatic shift toward the general objectification of the male body, specifically due to the convergence of the proliferation of men's fashions, new aesthetic codes for the representation of men in advertising, film, and television, and the advent of style or lifestyle magazines for male audiences such as GQ, Esquire, Maxim, FHM, and Men's Health. As many critics attest, commercial masculinity is most definitely not a trend. It continues to increase steadily, phenomenally even, in pervasiveness and significance. The marketing for Connery's Bond films were also just used to show off how he's an attractive man, with him getting a cover in Asian Adventure magazine where he's shirtless in the pool. Once Connery got a little older, he was out. He was no longer the young attractive man they needed to get women in seats, and 20 years later, they did the same thing all over again with Brosnan. Bond isn't some paragon of masculinity, he's a metrosexual. Metrosexuals endorse equal opportunity vanity through cosmetics, softness, women, hair care products, wine bars, gyms, designer fashion, wealth, the culture industries, finance, cities, cosmetic surgery, and deodorants. Brosnan was often taken to represent just such politically correct masculinity, polished, witty, well-dressed, and finely groomed. This is Brosnan's Bond, and mostly Connery's Bond too, except for the politically correct part. Bond is proper, witty, almost always wearing a suit, and has perfect hair. With all that said, it's time for... Is Bond a performance of masculinity? No. Despite MGM wanting you to think that he's a macho super spy, he's mostly just a bumbling idiot with a gun. James Bond is an unintentional parody of manliness. that leans more into metrosexuality than hegemonic masculinity.